In the winter of 1916, the hills of eastern Kentucky lay heavy under frost and fog, and the town of Knott County carried an unusual quiet. But there was one name the people spoke of in hushed tones, as if saying it too loud would call it near: Rosie Hale. She was not just another resident. She was someone whose presence stirred unease, even when she was nowhere near. That winter she entered the forest one evening, and never returned the same. Some said her voice followed them through the hollows, whispering their names when no one should have been there. Others claimed to glimpse a figure moving where there should have been nothing at all. And those who sought to uncover what happened, they never spoke clearly of it again. What did the hills hold that winter? And why did Rosie Hale vanish into a story that would haunt the Appalachians for generations? The forest stretched endlessly, a tangle of towering oaks and frost-covered maples, their branches heavy under ice. The ground was uneven, littered with fallen leaves, broken twigs, and the occasional rusting relic of cabins long abandoned. Every step seemed to echo unnaturally, a soft percussion against the silence. The wind moved slowly through the hollows, carrying with it the scent of damp earth and smoke from distant hearths. Even the animals seemed cautious, their calls muffled, brief, as if they too recognized an unseen presence. The fog lay thick over the creek beds, curling between rocks like fingers reaching across the landscape. Townsfolk rarely ventured beyond certain ridges at night. It was a place that demanded respect, and one where curiosity could become dangerous. And yet, Rosie Hale walked there alone, her figure lost in the shadows, leaving behind questions no one dared fully answer. Rosie Hale was not an ordinary girl, though she blended with the rhythms of the mountains during the day. She had a way of knowing when the fog would settle thick, when the paths would twist without warning. Some said she could speak to the winds themselves, though whether she did or merely listened was unclear. It began with small oddities, missing tools from cabins, footprints that led nowhere, lights flickering in the forest when no one should have been there. At first, these occurrences were dismissed as accidents, tricks of the winter months, or pranks by children. But soon, animals disappeared along the ridges. A neighbor reported seeing her shadow stretch longer than it should, moving against the wind. Each evening, the whispers returned, carried from the hills, soft enough to be doubted, but persistent enough to make one pause mid-step. Every attempt to understand what was happening seemed to draw Rosie further from the village, into the depths of the Appalachian woods where few dared follow. One night, a local man ventured near the creek, where the mist was thickest. He claimed he heard a child's voice calling, yet when he turned, the figure vanished. A shawl lay across a log, frosted and damp, though no one had seen her pass there. Those who encountered her presence spoke of a sudden cold, as if the air itself recoiled. The fear was subtle at first, growing in layers. A shadow flitting behind a tree, a distant figure that vanished if approached, the sound of steps when no one should be near. Townsfolk whispered of Rosie's strange eyes, wide and alert, watching not just the forest, but those who came close. And the question lingered: was she part of the hills, or had the hills claimed her? Then came the night when everything changed. A neighbor reported seeing her near the edge of the forest, standing perfectly still beneath the skeletal branches of an oak. Moonlight glinted off something in her hand, though it was impossible to tell what. She seemed to move without moving, as though the fog carried her, rather than the ground. The witness swore the figure wore familiar clothing, perhaps her own, or perhaps something left behind long ago. Shadows shifted in ways that made the trees themselves appear to lean closer, reaching toward her as if drawn by some unseen force. The wind carried a sound unlike anything else, a low, mournful call that matched neither animal nor human, stretching across the hollows in waves. For a moment, the forest felt alive, each branch and ridge attentive. Then she was gone, leaving behind only the echo of her presence and the faint frost imprint on the earth where she had stood. What had the observer seen? And more importantly, what had Rosie become in that frozen landscape? The legend of Rosie Hale grew with each retelling. Villagers spoke of her last days in fragments, the way she wandered, unafraid of places that should have terrified anyone else, the cold that seemed to follow her even into warm rooms, the night when livestock vanished along the ridges near her cabin. Her family tried to intervene, but each effort only seemed to distance her further. Letters she left behind were cryptic, filled with references to whispers in the wind and shadows that moved independently. There were stories of others who dared follow her, a cousin, a neighbor, a stranger passing through the county, all returning with haunted eyes, unable to describe exactly what they had seen. Some swore the hills themselves had shifted around them, leading them away from paths they had walked countless times. And through it all, Rosie remained just out of reach, a presence felt in every bend of the hollows, in every flicker of moonlight through the trees. The winter deepened, and the snow arrived early that year, blanketing the hills in white. The footprints that had once followed Rosie vanished into drifts of frost, only to reappear where they should not have been. Lights glimmered behind closed windows. Shadows fell across walls at angles no candle could create. It was as if the hills themselves were holding their breath, waiting for something to emerge. Witnesses described hearing her singing softly to herself in the distance, a tune no one recognized, but everyone remembered. Children would awake in the night, claiming they heard her voice calling from the forest. And always the question remained: what had happened to Rosie Hale in the cold of 1916, and how much of her story belonged to the world of the living? One final account describes a traveler lost near the ridge where Rosie was last seen. He recalled the forest closing in, fog rising so thick it swallowed the path. Shapes moved through the mist, not quite trees, not quite people. A faint light appeared ahead, flickering like a lantern, but when he approached, it revealed nothing. Then came the sound, a voice, unmistakably female, singing softly yet carrying across the frozen hollows. It called his name, then others, in tones that twisted and echoed. He fled, and when he turned back, the light was gone. The mist lifted, yet there was a figure etched in snow where none should have stood. A shawl, damp and frost-covered, lay upon the ground. No one could explain how it got there. It was the final message from the hills that winter, a sign that Rosie's presence endured, neither fully gone nor entirely seen. The observer left with the impression that the forest itself had been waiting for her, keeping her secrets locked in the folds of the hollows. He spoke of a cold that lingered long after leaving, of footsteps that echoed behind him when none were near. And even now, over a century later, the hills carry her story, in the whispers of the wind, in the shift of the trees, and in the memory of anyone who dares walk the paths she once knew. Rosie Hale was never found in the way the townsfolk hoped. The forest gave no answers, and the snow covered every trace of her passage. Some say she remains there, wandering, calling, a part of the land itself. Others claim the hills remember her, shaping events and shadows to keep her story alive. The fear she inspired was not in violence or screams alone, but in the way the unknown lingered, in the way the human mind can feel the presence of something beyond comprehension. Even those who left the Appalachians carried her with them, in dreams, in fleeting thoughts, in the sudden certainty that the hills are never empty, not for long. Would you dare spend a night alone in those woods, knowing the story of Rosie Hale? Could you trust your senses when the wind carries her voice across the hollows? If you're still watching, you are braver than most. Subscribe to Dark Room of Whispers for more stories that walk the line between history and the unknown. And step carefully, for some whispers are meant to be heard, but never followed.